To determine where the ends of the ebony bars are going to come, I marked off using just a thickness that matches the sides here, matching it up with an angle, 3 segments. The center bar will come out to the 3rd segment on the long side. The bottom and top set bars will come out to the 2nd segment on the long sides. And on the short sides, just 1 segment of the thickness. So it'll come out just to what your eye sees as the thickness of this side piece here. For the depth of each of those, the inside of my box here down to the floor of the box is 1 5/8 inches, and I divided that out by 6 because I have 3 bars and 3 spaces essentially, so I'm not cutting through the floor of the box with this spline that I'm going to put through. The splines will help strengthen the corners and the glue joint here, helping hold that together. They'll also add a real decorative element. Getting ready to cut the spline grooves, I've decided to center the center spline on the height of the side of the box, and I got that by measuring the distance from the top of the box to the table, and then I transferred that measurement to the height of the gantry here, which will give me half the distance, which is where my bit is. And yes, it's unplugged. Once I've determined that that's my center, using a 1/4 inch bit, I'll leave the dust collection off so you can see what I'm doing. I brought this up to the piece of work. I've got a center point marked here so that I can do the opposite corner and make sure everything lines up the same, and I can just transfer the stops. I can set the depth of cut at 1/4 inch. That will allow the bit to sink in here at the bottom, just enough to bury a piece of wood in there. That'll be cutting across this way, and then I'll cut across this way on this end, and that's how deep the L will be buried. It'd probably be stronger if I went a little bit deeper than that. For the second one and third one up, I can go as deep as I want. Currently it's set at 1/4 because that's where I need the bottom one set. If I brought this in any more than that 1/4 inch, it's going to be too weak of a wall in that corner there, and I don't want that. So for this one, I'm going to go just at 3/8 inch, set that on the bottom, and now you can see that it's going to come about that far in. This is my line to where the rest of the spline goes, so could take it even further than that, I guess. 3/8, yeah, I'll make it 1/2, which means my spline that I make is going to have to be even more than that. So that'll go about that deep in. That looks like it'll support this corner and keep it glued together nice and tight. The stop is set so that the bit is going to stop right on my line here. That's the line I have drawn for the angle of the box, and it's just touching the tape with the bit horizontal, so that's where it's going to end up, and then I'll square that hole up afterwards. Now that I have the grooves cut for the splines, I need to square up the corners. They're rounded right now from the router bit, and I want them square. I've decided that I'm going to put them square to the top edge and bottom edge of the tray rather than keeping them parallel to the angled sides. It's just a design choice. Now there's a couple of ways that you could go about this. I could use a chisel and take that in. That means that I have to be really, really careful about getting things aligned. And also my chisel, I have one that's 3/16 inch, and I have this one that is 6 millimeters, which is less than 1/4 inch. And I want really clean sides here. But I have something that I prefer to use, That's a 1/4-inch square hole punch that I have for making green and green furniture. I'll take this by lining up the corners inside my groove and then keep it square to the top and bottom. Before I cut into my expensive ebony, I decided to make a couple of templates for what these splines should look like. They're just basic L's like this, but I wanted to make sure I had them big enough and the right shape before I go cutting into the ebony. So to do that, I just took some thin stock and marked out the depth and all the way in, and I want it just a little bit proud. So this piece is just as long as the longest piece that I need. Want it longer than the end, and I can mark out the side of that. And then for the opposite corner, I want it the full length here, so the opposite corner, setting that in, I want that also to be a little bit proud for the length of that, and that will allow this key, oops, and the depth of that can be just what the normal groove is because it'll be set away from that. So my groove is 3/8 of an inch deep. It'll come out a little bit of that from the length, and that gave me this kind of a key where the length is a little bit longer for the sides, and I can tell that on the top side, which is going to take up more material than on the bottom, I do have a little bit of proud on the top edge here, the short edge, and on the long side both. That's exactly what I want. I tested it all the way around on all 4 corners just to make sure. And same thing for the smaller keys. The top and the bottom splines are the same length in and the same size, so this key will work just fine there. So I've got this so that I can cut 2 splines out of this block. By cutting in these relief cuts here, I can cut out enough space to be able to turn my blade and then cut down this line using very little waste for the ebony. After thinking it through a bit, I decided I really need to sand everything down first. Then I'll put in the splines. Then I'll do the staining or the dyeing of the rest of the piece, because that way I'll have everything sanded on these corners and get nice rounded edges before I put the splines in. Take the splines down, sand those down, and as I sand the splines down, it won't be taking away or scratching up the surface of the already dyed outer box. So dyeing needs to come after the splines are in. Time for gluing in the splines now that I have everything sanded. a little bit snug on that one. I just want to ease off the edge so that it slides in a little bit easier. That'll allow it to get in without messing anything up. I'd like a little less squeeze out than I got on that one. It's better. I'm tapping them sound all the way down to the bottom back edge and to the groove here so that everything's tight. And the excess you're seeing here on the bottom, it's almost flush on the top due to the angles. Made them plenty long on the top, which is great. You can plane all of that off later. I'll continue around on the other sides, and after it's dry, we'll plane them down. Now I need to level these out, and I want to take them actually pretty close, just a little bit proud of the base. I'm going to take a plane first and get as much of the material off as I can. There's quite a bit there. The next part is, well, on the ends here, I'm going to use the rasp because it's end grain on the ebony, and I don't want it to chip out on me, so I'll use the rasp, and then I take it down with sandpaper. And the sandpaper is going to leave quite a bit of residue on the wood there, but it'll clean up with alcohol afterwards. And I just want to make sure it's level. And I'll take the ends of these down with a very slight angle just to help round that off. What I'm after here is just kind of a little pillowed effect. And the other tool that I like to use on this is the card scraper, because that'll help make sure all of them are the same height and the same distance up. And I can also get this end tapered down a bit. Also doesn't leave as bad of stuff going into the grain. I'm gonna try, I need to decide still if I'm gonna put a couple of spots of silver in the ends of these. It's just something that kind of matches our other green and green furniture. I probably will just leave it as it is. I'll polish these all the way up to about a 600 grit so that they're nice and shiny. I've cleaned the entire project with denatured alcohol. Actually, I've gone over it twice to make sure that I get those ebony bits out of the wood as much as possible. And now I'm gonna go over it with 7 parts orange, 4 parts brown of this is General Finishes water-based dye stain, and I'll be matching the bottom to the sides with this. I just noticed that there's a bit of a rough spot here that got scratched up from something. So I'm gonna take that down a little bit smoother. Because this is a serving tray, I want to make sure that the finish is going to be durable enough to handle any spills that might happen. That's why I decided to go with a simple poly rather than using something like shellac. A couple of things to keep in mind when doing finishing work. First of all, I always use gloves. Generally, I prefer to wipe on finishes, but in this case, I'm going to be using a good, pretty bristled brush. Third thing is, so that I can do the whole thing at one time, I've just got painter's points of sorts. Just want to make sure that those points, I've filed them flat a little bit so that they aren't as likely to scratch the wood surface.